Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about a great book about magic that's been published recently, and it's been written by one of my favourite magic authors. I have a copy here of the book How to Become a Modern Magus by Webb, and the subtitle is A Manual for Magicians of All Schools. So here's the book. It's quite thick, and I really like this book. I reviewed a book by the same author recently, my video that's called Energy Magic. The book I'm talking about in that video is also written by the same author. So I'm going to talk about what's in this book, but I also want to say that this is one of the best books about the approach to contemporary magic. It's called, Modern Magus, How to Become a Modern Magus. Some people refer to modern day magic as contemporary magic. That's what I prefer to call it, but modern has similar meaning. Modern magic is, that term is used to differentiate between the more traditional forms, for example, the esoteric schools of Eliphas Levi, the Golden Dawn, that type of thing. I think the true modern school of magic was the Lema, Crowley's the Lema, and then after that, chaos magic. But this book is really encompassing modern magical schools, including chaos magic, which is good. So I'm going to talk about what's in this book, and I love the way Webb writes. It's accessible, it's thorough, it's also funny, and it's practical. And Webb has been a practicing magician for a few decades, so he really does know his stuff. So to talk about what is in this book, I also should mention that this really is a manual, as the subtitle states. This is a 12-month course on modern magic. So it's divided into 12 chapters, one for each month. And at the end of each chapter, there's a list of questions. But this is not questions in a testing sort of way. These are questions for self-reflection, which I think is a great idea. There's not many magic manuals that include that type of thing. This book really includes everything. It's a type of book that I think quite a few people who are even at the intermediate stage of magic would think that it's a sort of book that you sort of wish was written at the time that you were a beginner starting out, because this book is for beginners, but it's also good for people at the intermediate level, because it's kind of a refresher, but at the same time there's things in here that you most likely have not seen before or have not thought about before. So it's really good in that way too. There's a very, very good introduction by the author. He makes a point of saying that he's written this book because there are too many beginner books out there. This is for beginners as well as intermediate magicians. So I think that's important. So to talk about the types of things that are in this book. So as I was saying, it's divided into the 12 chapters, one for each month. And at the very beginning, before chapter 1, the introduction is not only a personal introduction about the author, but it's also an introduction to magic itself. But it's written in an interesting way. It's not sort of like a boring history type of thing. It's a really good introduction to magic, basically talking about defining magic and also looking at the reasons why people are interested in magic in the first place. So this is not just a how book, a practical how to do things. This is also asking a lot or talking a lot about the reasons why. And I think that's overlooked in a lot of books. Then there is a very good section on the dangers of occultism. Sort of like a bit of a warning section. But that is important too. And I love the way that the author talks about all the different kinds of dangers, personal dangers, social dangers, things that can affect your personal life. Those kinds of things are not mentioned enough in magic books either. So I think that's great. So he also outlines in the introduction the types of things that he set out to do with this book. Now, he's got here a realistic list of the dangers of magic and the dangers of magic as well as occultism, and I think that's important. Systemic approach to self-chosen self-change through magic. That's also overlooked a bit too. The kinds of changes that are likely to happen when you start practicing magic and adopting a magical mindset. A mind-body-soul system that supports self-change and empowerment. Now, the type of magic that Don Webb knows and practices is mainly left-hand path. So that is all about self-empowerment. The integration of findings. He includes sort of psychology and a bit of philosophy in here too. This is why it's all interesting, but he writes it in an accessible way, so there's not, an intellectual book. Guidelines for deciding your magical ethics. So ethics is always important. And he also talks about initiation and things that will factor or can factor in life events, family, environment, and goals. So that's important too. And he's got different methods here for helping to remove some unwanted social conditioning, but that's like from upbringing. Learning to embrace the unknown. And something that he calls here stepping into the sea of wonder. So being more open-minded about wonder in all its different forms. So he also starts the book, the first 4 chapters are about each of the elements. Now you may think, oh, that's been done before, but not in the way that Don Webb does things. I think it's important too that you look at each of the 4 elements first. So there's a chapter on each of the first 4 elements, but before the 4 elements, so chapter 1 is called Barriers, Crossroads and Secrets. That's chapter 1. I think it's a really good idea the way that Don Webb differentiates between barriers and crossroads and defines what they are. That's important too. So chapter 1 is about barriers, crossroads and secrets. Then each of the 4 chapters after that are the elements, each of the elements. And then after that, you get, because you're at the end of chapter 5 then, there is a week to reflect on elemental magic. That is to consolidate what you've been learning from each of the chapters, because this is a 12-month course. Then the next section of the book, the next group of chapters, is Egyptian soulcraft, and that is about, it's divided into the main gods of the Egyptian pantheon, which is, very important. So you've got a chapter on Horus, a chapter on Isis, a chapter on Anubis, and a chapter on Set. And then that takes you to chapter 9. And then you have, again, at the end of the 4 chapters, you have got a week to consolidate, what he calls an interim period, an interim reflection. And the other thing that he encourages people to do as well, which I think is a great idea, is to keep a diary. Which is a great idea, because that is something that you would normally do. You would normally keep a journal, whatever you want to call it. You would be usually taking notes of some kind, even if they're just brief reflections on what you're doing with any course. So I think that's a really good idea. Then the last 3 chapters, because that takes you to chapter 9, and the last 3 chapters are called the 3 lovely and challenging phases of time. So this is past, present, future. But he ties this in with the Norns, Verdandi, Erd and Skuld. So there's a chapter on each of the 3 Norns. Then it goes into additional resources. So he includes a special book of gates, which I think is great. He even covers a bit of dream work in here too, which I think is a good idea. Then there's a conclusion, separate conclusion that he writes. And then there is quite a good bibliography and an index. I just love this book. I really like anything that Don Webb writes, really. It's just useful, it's detailed. And at the end of each of these chapters, you've got these reflective questions. There's things to do, there's exercises, things to try, things to practice. There aren't many diagrams or pictures in here, but you don't really need them, because this is all about sort of rolling your sleeves up and getting things done. There are just sort of small kinds of things like this, just to describe different definitions. But it's a really great book. It really is. It is the kind of book that I wish had been around a number of years ago, but it doesn't matter. I'm still getting things out of this now. So the main thing is I have the book now. but I just love the whole way it's been written. It's great. There is there is a section here on group work, but it's mainly for solo practitioners. And this was only published earlier this year. 450 pages, about 450 pages. It's a great book. People who are interested, I'll put some details below the video. It is How to Become a Modern Magus, a manual for magicians of all schools, by Webb. It's just a great book. I think for people who are curious about magic, this is the right approach. And it's just a really useful book. I think it's an interesting book. It's topical as well. For people who are interested, curious about magic, who want to make a start on that, or even for people, as I said, who are intermediate, at the intermediate level, or even a little bit further, and they want to do not only a refresher, but to look at things in a different way. The subtitle is a manual for magicians of all schools. So I think it's good to look at different things and different approaches, especially if you mainly work with one one particular system, and you are wondering about other systems or just other ways to look at magic. This is a great book for that. So I really like this book, and I was really keen to talk about this book today, let people know that it's been newly published. So I'll put some details below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.